Did you know that the concept of estate planning and leaving a legacy originated from biblical times? Yes. So this video is going to air on Easter Monday, which I didn't even know Easter Monday was a thing, but I looked at the calendar, it said Easter Monday. I'm like, okay. Well, some of you may know that Easter is actually a holiday that is celebrated for Resurrection Sunday. It's not about the bunny rabbits, although they're cute. It is about Jesus Christ resurrecting and defeating death and having the victory, and ultimately having died for the sins of his people. And so I wanted to, sometime last year, I wrote a script for a video, and it was regarding inheritance and the Bible, and how that sort of how legacy planning and estate planning and all that stuff has originated from biblical times, right? And I never recorded the video, and I don't know why. I was like having such a hard time this week. What am I going to talk about? What am I going to talk about? What's helpful? What's relevant? And this popped into my mind. Remember that script that you wrote about legacy and estate plan? I'm like, oh, this would be a perfect time to talk about that. So let's get into it. It's been a while since I did a video on estate planning, but this is kind of going to be the warm up to get back into these conversations. And one of the scriptures that has always been, for me as an estate planner, relevant is that a good man leaves an inheritance for his children and his children's children. And I always wondered, really, is that really about leaving an inheritance? Is that really about estate planning? And there's a whole bunch of different views on this as to whether the inheritance is a monetary inheritance, if the inheritance is a spiritual inheritance. Does it mean that you are good if you are able to leave an inheritance, and you're not good if you're not able to leave an inheritance? And so in my studies and preparing for today, I realized, I got clarity on the fact that it doesn't mean that you're bad if you can't leave an inheritance. That's not what it's saying. It's basically saying that if you leave an inheritance, generally, good people with good hearts want to leave an inheritance to their children or their loved ones, and to allow the generations to come to prosper. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be monetary, right? It could also be spiritual. So I wanted to kind of get into the different types of inheritance that we can leave, because for me, I found that in doing estate planning, a lot of the value of what people's estates are, or the value that they bring to their lives, is not just the money, but it's also the know-how, it's also the lessons, it's also the responsibility, and maybe the business acumen and the things that they teach and show their families, in addition to leaving them a spiritual inheritance where they have a relationship with God in some capacity, whatever your religion is, but also you just have a connection to a higher power. And I've done you guys know I do a lot of reading and I share with you the things that I read. And I find that mostly every successful person talks about them sort of like coming to an awakening that they need some level of spirituality to be fully and completely successful. So in thinking about your legacy and leaving an inheritance for your loved ones, you want to think about not only the monetary, but what are the moral things that you've learned, and what are the spiritual things that you've learned that you can also pass on to your loved ones. So in biblical times, there's a lot about inheritance. Like a lot of the historical books talk about inheritance and leaving something for your loved ones, whether it be physical, spiritual, or whatnot. And so I wanted to kind of get into the different directives between the old and the new that talk about inheritances. So in the Old Testament, we hear about monetary inheritance, or things like cattle and land and things of that nature. So if you are, a believer, then you will listen to this with a different light. But if you are not a believer, you can still listen and understand this message from the point of view of it being a historical book that was around thousands and thousands of years, and it gives us instructions on what we can do to prepare for our loved ones, right? And so one of the main stories is about Joshua. He was the successor to Moses. Moses is known for getting the Jews out of Egypt and bringing them to the point where they're about to enter the promised land. Then Joshua takes over, and he is the person who is going to help them conquer and inhabit their land. He's going to help them get their inheritance. And so once they have to fight for their land, and once they do that, they are then at the point where the land is being allocated. And it basically there's 12 tribes, and the instructions which were given by God to Moses as to who gets what, right? The instructions basically leaves a portion of land to each of the tribes, right? It is divided. There are conditions, there are rules that they have to follow, and they are given their particular plot of land. So what I thought was interesting about this in terms of how we sort of apply it is that there was order, right? There was order, there was a plan, there was a way that each plot of land was supposed to be divided. And those were instructions that were left. Could you imagine you have 12 tribes, hundreds of thousands of people trying to figure out who gets what land, the amount of chaos that would have been involved in that situation? I'm sure it still wasn't even smooth at that point, but at least there was a plan, at least there was an order, so that there was peace among the people to be able to say, hey, okay, we know what's ours is ours, if it's not ours, it's not ours. And so because this decision was already made for us, because this inheritance was predetermined, we can just take possession of the land that we know is ours, and we don't have to fight over it, and we don't have to have disputes over it. And basically the instructions and the orders made it easier for, judges and local decision makers to basically settle disputes and deal with issues that may have came up during that period of time. And there was even a specific distribution for these women called the daughters of Zelophehad. I probably butchered that, so please forgive me if you know the correct way to say it. But the whole point is, at that time, women were not able to receive distribution. They were not able to receive inheritances for whatever reason. So before Moses had died, they made basically a petition saying, hey, our father died in the wilderness. We don't have any brothers who can basically take this inheritance. But why should we not be able to get an inheritance of our father that our father was entitled to just because we're women? And Moses prayed to God about this and was given the instruction that, yeah, that makes sense. They should receive the inheritance of their father if they don't have any brothers or what have you to receive that inheritance. So basically that specific provision was put in place to make sure that these women, although they wouldn't have received something, they will now receive something because it makes more sense for that to be the case. And then there was later on disputes as to, well, what if they get married and they marry outside the tribe? Then what happens to, this inheritance? And so was that, okay, right, that makes sense. There was a condition that they need to marry within the tribe so that the land and their possessions stay within the tribe. So this brings me back to when you create an estate plan, you are making decisions that you don't want essentially the law to make for you. You want to have specific conditions and specific instructions as to what you would like to happen to your physical possessions, when you leave them behind for your loved ones. And you want to consider, what each person's already has in terms of their possessions. And you want to consider what is fair and what makes sense for you, your life, your decision making, whatever you decide. And there's another provision in the Bible that basically says that wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but wealth gained over time will increase, right? And so that also goes to tell us that, listen, you don't want to necessarily leave an inheritance that is going to cause issue, right, for your loved ones. You don't want to leave an inheritance that's going to make them worse off than they would be had they not had the inheritance. So this comes into play when people get an abundance of wealth, maybe at a young age or at a time where they're not responsible or where it's just overwhelming. It's something that they're not used to. And so it could cause them to either harm themselves, harm others, or just simply waste the inheritance, right? So you want to make sure that you have provisions in there that allow them to accumulate this inheritance or benefit from this inheritance either over time or slowly or in a limited capacity so that it can be a blessing and not a curse or not a burden on them. And so going back to that, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children and his children's children. It's not just the monetary aspect, right? We also said that it was about the spiritual aspect as well. So leaving a spiritual inheritance, I always think about people of the Jewish faith, how they are raised extremely, I would say, educated about their faith, their history of their people, and their customs and religions, and why they have these customs and religions, and the promises of God, and understanding and reading the scriptures that tell them about their faith. And I think that is a great way for us to leave that spiritual inheritance, right? And there's the Muslim people who they pray multiple times a day, and they are very connected to their religious readings and their religious scriptures, and whatever it is that you believe, whatever walk of faith that you are in. I think it's important for us to not only practice that, but also to teach our children what it is, because most religions have, and I say that carefully, gently, most religions do have a moral thread, right, that runs through, that keeps us grounded and keeps us understanding who we are in position to a higher power, who we are in this world, and what our responsibility is to one another, mostly mostly loving one another and being kind to one another, and creating this world together. And I think it's important that we be reminded that it is our responsibility to continue that. We shouldn't be silent on these things. The same way we teach our children, our family members, about financial literacy and what you should invest in, and how you should save your money, and how you could, grow your wealth, and how do you be responsible with the assets that are left to you? How do you be responsible? How do you care for them? And how do you continue them to grow? We should also be leaving instruction and educating and helping one another to know, how do you be a whole person? How do you be a good person? What are the promises that were made to you? Or what do we know about this life and who we are and how we are to live? These type of things are really important as well. And I think, I'm pretty sure I said this already, but I'm going to say it again just because I feel like it's important that, anybody who has been successful and has found happiness in their version of success, or what they thought was success, because anybody could reach their goals, right? But are you also happy and complete and full of joy and balance at the same time? So anyone who I have had the benefit of learning from, who has found success and happiness, has said that spirituality needs to be a part of that, right? Your belief system needs to be a part of that, whatever that is. And I was actually listening to this gentleman, I feel like his name is Rainn Wilson. He played Dwight Schrute in The Office, and he was talking about the fact that he grew up sort of with a bunch of sort of religions, in a sense. It wasn't one particular thing, but his parents practiced different religions, and there was kind of just like a spiritual sort of aspect of life. But as he got older, like his teen to young adult, not really young adult, his teen to, I don't know, if you're in your 20s, you're a young adult, whatever. In that period of time, he kind of strayed away from his faith and decided, because he wanted to act and he wanted to have a good time and he wanted to, do the things that young people want to do. And then as he continued to be successful in his life, he was not happy. He felt empty. And so he decided to connect back to his faith and his spirituality. And then he found, happiness and peace. And he has a podcast and he wrote a book about it. And so I just say that to say, right? You will come back to this place. And I think it will be helpful for us to teach those that are coming behind us that part of our lives, so that they don't have to stray and come back, but that they hopefully can have that sort of thread and guidance throughout their lives, which will also help them, in the event that they do receive an inheritance, that they will have a better a moral compass to help them sort of navigate having wealth, because having wealth is not an easy thing either. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with it. To whom much is given, much is required. So, we want to just sort of make sure that we're also equipping the next generation, our loved ones, with the tools to basically be successful at it. So I hope this was helpful for you in understanding the history of how legacy planning and estate planning kind of comes into place, and how there are two different aspects of it that we want to sort of bring together to make sure that we're being responsible and we're being complete when we are thinking about legacy, talking about legacy, planning our legacies. Thank you so much for listening. I know this was a little bit different. Let me know what you thought about me being able to share in this way. And I wanted to sort of marry both my interest and passion for legacy with my faith to kind of help you and bring some clarity. So let me know what you thought about this episode, and I appreciate you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.